A racist security guard refuses to let a black woman, Vanessa Thompson, enter a luxury car dealership, and the situation escalates as he becomes physically confrontational with her. However, later, he's stunned when she returns, and karma finds its way back to him. The afternoon sun gleamed off the polished glass doors of the luxury car dealership, casting sharp reflections onto the sidewalk where Vanessa stood. Dressed in a tailored navy suit, she looked every inch the successful lawyer she was, her heels clicking purposefully against the pavement as she approached the entrance. Her eyes were fixed on the sleek sports car displayed just beyond the glass, and she reached for the door handle. But before her fingers could touch the cool metal, a voice stopped her. "We're closed, ma'am," a man called out. Vanessa turned to see a tall, uniformed security guard standing nearby with his arms crossed over his chest, a stern expression on his face. His name tag read Daniel Reynolds. She offered a polite smile, glancing back at the door. "Closed? The sign says you're open until 6. It's only 4, she replied. But Daniel didn't move. His face stayed impassive, and he repeated, "We're closed. You'll have to come back another time." Confused but holding her irritation in check, Vanessa asked, "Are you sure? I just wanted to look at the new models." Daniel's voice came slower, as though she hadn't understood. "We're closed." His gaze flicked over her, his jaw tightening ever so slightly. Vanessa's tone stayed measured. "Could I speak with the manager then? Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding." "The manager's busy," Daniel snapped, "and like I said, we're closed." Vanessa steadied herself, well practiced in dealing with these subtle dismissals, the quick, veiled glances, the way people became busy when she appeared. But this didn't make it any less difficult. "I'll wait for the manager then," she said, keeping her voice calm yet firm. Daniel's posture shifted. He uncrossed his arms, took a step closer, and sneered. "You're not getting in, lady. There's a used car dealership down the road that might be more your speed." A tight knot formed in Vanessa's chest, and she paused, letting his words linger. The silence that followed only thickened the tension between them. "I'm interested in what you sell here, luxury cars," she said, her voice cool and steady. "Now, could you get the manager, please?" Daniel's expression hardened as he muttered, "We're closed for your kind." Though he said it quietly, she heard it, and the knot in her chest tightened. She had learned not to react too quickly, but those words cut deep, as they always did. "I see," she murmured, her voice quieter. "I'll leave, but I will be back." Without another word, Vanessa turned and walked back to her car, her heels echoing against the pavement. She slid inside, gripping the steering wheel tightly as she took a steadying breath. Though she had experienced this type of discrimination before, it still managed to shock and anger her each time. In her rearview mirror, Vanessa watched as another customer approached. A white woman, this time. Vanessa's gaze followed her as she strolled up to the door, easily pulling it open without a second thought. Daniel appeared immediately, his entire demeanor changed. Smiling, he opened the door for her and welcomed her inside with ease. Vanessa's heart raced, her frustration deepening. The blatant double standard made her stomach turn, yet she maintained her calm, calculating her next steps. Unable to suppress her anger any longer, she got out of her car, her heels clicking purposefully as she approached the entrance again. Daniel, who had been smiling and conversing with the white woman, instantly lost his smile at the sight of Vanessa. "Excuse me," Vanessa's voice sliced through the conversation. "I thought the dealership was closed." The white woman looked between Vanessa and Daniel, visibly uncomfortable, but stayed silent. Daniel's expression grew cold again. "It is closed," he replied flatly. "But the lady here?" Vanessa's gaze fixed on him, unflinching. "What? Is there a different set of rules for some people?" Because she didn't seem to have any trouble getting in. Daniel's jaw clenched as he cast a quick look at the white woman, who looked increasingly awkward. "This has nothing to do with you," he muttered. "It has everything to do with me." Vanessa countered. "I asked to see the manager. You refused. I asked why the dealership was closed when the sign says otherwise, and you didn't answer. Yet this woman walks right in with no problem." Daniel took a step toward her, his tone low and menacing. "She belongs here. You don't." The words hit Vanessa hard. Though she had sensed his unspoken attitude, hearing it was a painful slap. Steadying herself, she said, "I'm not leaving until I speak to the manager." Daniel's eyes narrowed. Fine, I'll get him. But don't think you're getting what you want. He turned and disappeared into the building, leaving Vanessa alone by the door. The white woman, still uncomfortable, quickly muttered an excuse and slipped inside, leaving Vanessa standing there alone. Her mind raced, anger simmering beneath the surface. She had experienced this type of treatment in restaurants, hotels, even courtrooms, yet it never felt less personal. Every time, it felt like an attack on her identity. Minutes passed, 5, then 10. Vanessa glanced at her watch, realizing Daniel hadn't gone to fetch anyone. He had simply gone inside, hoping she'd give up and leave. She wasn't about to. Finally, Daniel reappeared alone, his expression smug. "There's no manager available," he announced. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "You didn't even try, did you? You just hoped I'd get tired and leave." Daniel took another step closer. "Lady, if you don't leave now, I'll remove you myself." The rage Vanessa had kept at bay broke through. "You're going to put your hands on me because I asked to see the manager?" Daniel's gaze darkened as he crossed his arms, towering over her. "I'm not asking again. Get off the property, or I'll make you leave." Vanessa didn't flinch. "I have every right to be here, and I'm not leaving until I get what I asked for." But Daniel was already moving. He grabbed her arm roughly, pulling her away from the door with an unyielding grip. "Get your hands off me," she shouted, struggling against him. "I warned you," Daniel growled, dragging her toward the edge of the lot. Vanessa managed to break free, stumbling slightly before regaining her balance. As he stood there, threatening to call the police, she knew that leaving now was the only option. But this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Without another word, she walked to her car, every step heavy with indignation. Driving back to her office, Vanessa's hands trembled on the steering wheel, her thoughts racing. She knew exactly what she had to do. She dialed a familiar number, her friend and colleague Melanie Johnson, another attorney she trusted implicitly. "Mel?" Vanessa said when Melanie answered. "I need to meet urgently." In minutes, Vanessa was in one of the firm's conference rooms. As she recounted every detail, Melanie's face darkened with anger. When she finished, Melanie's voice was steady but angry. "That's absolutely unacceptable and illegal." Vanessa nodded, the weight of her anger easing slightly now that she had shared it. "I don't want this swept under the rug. I want action." "You'll get it," Melanie assured her. "We'll file a lawsuit. Discrimination, wrongful treatment, even assault if we can prove it. We're going to make sure they pay for this." "He did more than manhandle me," Vanessa said, clenching her fists. "He humiliated me." "I know," Melanie said gently. "We're going to make sure they answer for that. We'll gather evidence, file an injunction to protect any records." Vanessa's mind raced through each legal step, determined to expose the dealership's practices. She wouldn't let this go. "I want him fired," she said, her voice calm but unwavering. "And I want the dealership to face real consequences." Melanie nodded. "Once we're done with them, they'll have no choice but to settle." As the two attorneys mapped out their strategy, Vanessa felt her anger transform into focused determination. This wasn't just about a case. She was standing up for every person who had been dismissed, humiliated, or made to feel like they didn't belong. "I'm ready," Vanessa said resolutely. Melanie gathered her notes. "I'll start drafting the paperwork today. We'll file the lawsuit by the end of the week." Vanessa stood, a calm fire in her chest, knowing she was about to turn this injustice into a fight for justice. As she left the firm's office, the weight of what she was undertaking settled on her shoulders, but she felt a newfound strength. Daniel might have dragged her out of that lot, but she would drag him and the dealership into court. And there would be no escape. The familiar hum of the office around Vanessa gave her a sense of calm, though her mind was racing. This was the moment she'd anticipated. The legal fight was only beginning. And she was ready. Melanie entered, files in hand and a determined look on her face. "I've got everything we need to get started," she said confidently. "We're filing tomorrow morning." Vanessa nodded, her eyes sweeping over the stack of documents. "Good. This needs to be airtight, no loopholes, no gaps they can exploit." Melanie reassured her, spreading the files across Vanessa's desk. "Don't worry, they won't come out of this unscathed. We're including discrimination, unlawful eviction, emotional distress, and battery." Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "Battery?" Melanie smiled knowingly. That guard put his hands on you. That's battery, and it'll be enough to paint the dealership in a very bad light. Vanessa leaned back, tapping her fingers on the chair's armrest. We need to make sure they can't just sweep this under the rug. If they try to settle quietly, they need to know that won't be enough. This has to hurt. Melanie's expression grew serious. They'll try to cover their tracks, so we have to be thorough. I'm already gathering evidence, video footage from nearby businesses, witness statements from anyone who was around. The more we show this as a systemic problem, the better. Vanessa's frustration transformed into steely determination. What about the dealership's internal policies? I want to see if there's a history of racial discrimination, even if it's buried. Melanie placed another folder on her desk. I filed for an injunction, so they can't destroy any internal records. We'll dig through emails, hiring practices, even complaints from other customers if we find any. Vanessa flipped through the documents, focused on the strategy behind each charge. She wanted this case to expose more than what happened to her. It needed to be bigger. Let's make this about every customer who's been mistreated, every person of color who's been turned away or made to feel unwelcome. Melanie nodded. We'll look for a pattern of discrimination. If it's there, we'll find it. Vanessa's mind raced with possibilities. The lawsuit wasn't just about compensation. It was about exposing the deep-rooted prejudice that allowed people like Daniel to act without fear of consequence. If she could show this wasn't an isolated event, the dealership would have to take broader accountability. This will get messy, Melanie warned. They'll fight back hard, try to paint you as the troublemaker. You know how these cases go. Vanessa's lips pressed into a thin line. Let them try. I'm ready. Melanie leaned forward. We need to be careful about our media approach. If we go public too soon, they'll spin the narrative. But if we wait too long, they might settle quietly. Vanessa considered this. We'll keep it quiet for now. Let them think they can settle quietly. When they do, that's when we go on the offensive. Melanie grinned. That's the Vanessa I know. Make them come to us, then show no mercy. Vanessa smirked. For the next few hours, they went over every angle, each step of the plan falling into place with precision. When Melanie left, Vanessa stayed behind, staring at the stack of papers. She picked up the folder labeled Daniel Reynolds. A background check, employment history, a few minor complaints that had been dismissed. She knew there was more. People like Daniel didn't act in isolation. His arrogance, his entitlement, came from somewhere. She closed the folder and thought back to the confrontation outside the dealership. His words echoed, "Your kind doesn't belong here." He was wrong. She belonged wherever she chose, and soon he and everyone like him would understand that. Finally, gathering her things, Vanessa allowed herself a small smile. This was only the beginning. The next morning, Vanessa and Melanie officially filed the lawsuit, setting the legal proceedings in motion. The dealership was about to face a battle they hadn't anticipated, and Vanessa wouldn't stop until they were held accountable. She'd been denied once, but now she was breaking down their walls. As she approached the luxury car dealership later that day, the sun cast a warm glow over the city. This time, she wasn't there as a customer. She was there to send a message. In her hand was a bound stack of legal papers, the lawsuit notice against the dealership. Vanessa's eyes locked onto Daniel Reynolds, standing by the glass doors. He hadn't noticed her yet. She straightened her shoulders and walked across the lot with purpose. The tapping of her heels on the pavement was almost comforting. She was no longer the frustrated customer denied entry. She was the attorney delivering justice. Daniel saw her approach, and recognition sparked in his eyes. His expression hardened, hostility resurfacing. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice laced with annoyance. Vanessa didn't slow down. "I'm here to serve these," she replied, holding up the papers. "You might want to get the manager." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "We don't have time for your—" "I'm not here to argue, Daniel," she interrupted calmly. "I'm here on legal business. Either get the manager, or I'll serve you." Daniel stared at her, weighing his options, but Vanessa wasn't playing his game anymore. "I'll be right back," he muttered, disappearing into the building. Vanessa waited, her heart steady. She'd prepared for this, but there was still satisfaction in standing here with the papers that would shake the dealership. Moments later, a man in a dark suit with graying hair and a seasoned corporate look appeared. His name tag read John Mitchell, the manager she'd been denied seeing before. He offered a polite smile. "Miss Thompson, I understand there's been some miscommunication. I'm the manager here. How can I help?" Vanessa's gaze was unwavering. "I'm not here to discuss miscommunication, Mr. Mitchell. I'm here to serve you these papers." She handed him the documents. "Your dealership is being sued for racial discrimination, unlawful eviction, and battery. These are official papers." John's expression froze as he accepted them. He glanced at the cover page, his smile faltering. "This is unexpected," he stammered, trying to regain his composure. "I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. We can settle this outside court." Vanessa didn't flinch. "No misunderstanding, Mr. Mitchell. I was denied entry because of my race, and your employee physically removed me. This lawsuit is the result of those actions. If you want to avoid court, you'll need to take responsibility." John opened his mouth as if to argue, but stopped himself, glancing behind him. The tension was palpable. "We'll need time to review this," he finally said, more subdued. Vanessa nodded curtly. "Take all the time you need. My legal team is prepared to go to trial." Without another word, she turned and walked back to her car, knowing that the weight of those papers was already sinking in. Back at her office, she and Melanie reviewed the next steps. Serving the papers had been satisfying, but now came the real work. They knew the dealership would likely attempt a quick settlement to avoid bad press, but Vanessa didn't want a quiet resolution. "We keep pushing," she said, scanning their legal strategy. "They'll make an offer soon, but we need to keep building the case." Melanie nodded. "We'll make sure the settlement isn't just money. They need to change their practices." Vanessa agreed. This lawsuit isn't about compensation. It's about accountability. With the lawsuit filed, the next phase began. Vanessa knew this battle wouldn't be easy, but she was ready. She'd faced bigger challenges, but this one was personal. The dealership had shut her out, but now she held the power and wasn't letting go. Within days, the lawsuit was making headlines, turning the dealership's reputation upside down. Articles featured phrases like, "Luxury dealership faces racial discrimination lawsuit," and "Attorney takes on high-end dealer after incident." The media attention added pressure on the dealership, and Vanessa received a call from Melanie, her tone excited. "They're panicking," Melanie said. "I just heard from their lawyers. They're already talking settlement." Vanessa leaned back, a small smile forming. That didn't take long. Melanie confirmed, "The bad press is hurting them. They expected this to stay quiet. They're offering a payout to make it disappear. No policy changes, no accountability." Vanessa's smile faded. That's not enough. They discussed their next move. Vanessa decided, "We go public with a press conference. They need to understand this isn't going away." Melanie sounded surprised. "Are you sure? The media's already on our side." "That's why we need to keep the pressure on them," Vanessa replied. "They must be accountable not just to me, but to every person they've mistreated." After a pause, Melanie agreed. "All right, I'll set it up." The following day, Vanessa stood before a podium, microphones and cameras pointed at her. She'd spoken publicly before, but this felt different. As she began, she knew the stakes were higher, and the room held a charged silence. She took a deep breath, calming the nerves fluttering in her stomach. This wasn't about fame or attention. It was about justice. She reminded herself of that as the cameras clicked and the reporters settled in. She began to speak, her voice steady and clear. "I stand here today not only for myself, but for everyone who has ever faced discrimination, whether subtle or blatant, in places they have every right to be." The crowd was silent, hanging on her every word. "A few weeks ago," she continued, "I was denied entry to a luxury car dealership. I was told they were closed, even though they weren't. I watched as a white customer was allowed in while I was dismissed. When I stood my ground, I was physically removed from the property." She paused, letting her words settle over the audience. The cameras continued to flash, but the atmosphere grew thick with tension. "This lawsuit isn't just about what happened to me," she stated. "It's about holding businesses accountable. No one should be turned away because of their race. No one should be made to feel they don't belong. Dealerships like this one have been operating as if people like me don't deserve access to the same spaces. That stops now." Her voice was firm but not angry. She didn't need to shout to make her point. "Let me be clear," she continued. "This lawsuit isn't simply about money. It's about forcing change and ensuring this doesn't happen to anyone else. The dealership has a chance to do the right thing, to take responsibility, and to make real changes. If they refuse, I'm prepared to take this to court." She glanced at the reporters, many scribbling furiously in their notepads. By evening, she knew her words would be all over the news. "As a lawyer, I believe in justice, and justice will be served." With that, she stepped back from the podium, ending the press conference as abruptly as it had begun. Reporters shouted questions, but she walked away, confident her message had been delivered. The ball was now in the dealership's court. Back at the office, Vanessa and her colleague Melanie debriefed over coffee. The press conference had gone even better than expected. Public reaction was swift, with social media lighting up in support of Vanessa and condemning the dealership. "They'll have a hard time sweeping this under the rug now," Melanie said, scrolling through her phone. "Public sentiment is on our side." Vanessa nodded, a sense of satisfaction settling over her. The dealership, which had tried to dismiss her, now faced a full-blown crisis, and she wasn't going to back down. "They'll come back with a better offer soon," Melanie predicted. "But we need to make sure it's more than just money. They need to change how they operate." Vanessa's eyes flickered with determination, and we'll make sure they do. A week after the press conference, the dealership's legal team reached out again, desperate this time. Vanessa sensed the shift as soon as Melanie stepped into her office carrying a folder and looking particularly pleased. "They're scrambling," Melanie said with a smirk. "They've made a new offer." Vanessa raised an eyebrow, motioning for her to sit. "Let me guess, they're offering more money and hoping it'll make the problem go away." Melanie handed her the folder. "That, and they're vaguely promising to review their policies." Vanessa flipped through the pages, her eyes narrowing as she read. The financial offer was indeed larger, with mentions of possible policy reviews, but nothing concrete. Notably absent was any mention of accountability for Daniel Reynolds, the security guard involved. "They think this will be enough," Vanessa muttered, closing the folder. "I'm not interested in empty promises. I want action." Melanie leaned back in her chair, her face serious. "They're trying to sweep this under the rug, hoping you'll take the money and walk away." Vanessa's expression hardened with resolve. "We're going to push them harder. I want a real commitment to change, and I want Daniel fired. He's not getting off scot-free." Melanie grinned. "That's exactly what I thought. They're panicking because they know they can't fight us in court, but we need to make sure they know we won't settle for anything less than real accountability." Vanessa nodded, her mind made up. "Schedule a meeting with their legal team, and make sure Daniel is there. I want him to face the consequences of his actions." The meeting took place in a sleek downtown conference room, its glass walls offering a view of the city's skyline. Vanessa and Melanie arrived early, their legal files neatly organized and strategy fully in place. The dealership's legal team arrived shortly after, led by John Mitchell, the dealership's manager, and the familiar face of Daniel Reynolds. Vanessa felt a surge of anger at the sight of him, but kept her expression composed. Daniel avoided her gaze, sitting stiffly across from her. The lead attorney began, "Miss Thompson, we've reviewed your concerns and are prepared to offer a revised settlement. We're willing to increase the financial compensation significantly and conduct a review of our internal policies, including diversity training for all staff." Vanessa glanced at Melanie, who nodded slightly. Then Vanessa leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the attorney. "That's a start, but it's not enough. I'm not just here for money. I'm here for accountability." A silence fell over the room. Vanessa's gaze shifted to Daniel, whose face flushed with discomfort. She turned back to the attorney. "I want Daniel Reynolds fired," she said, her voice steady but firm. "He physically removed me, insulted me, and acted with blatant racial prejudice. He doesn't belong in a position of authority." John Mitchell shifted in his seat, his face tense. "Miss Thompson, we understand you're upset, but firing Daniel—" "I'm not upset, Mr. Mitchell," Vanessa interrupted, calm but unyielding. "I'm holding your dealership accountable. You allowed this man to represent your company, and he treated me as if I didn't belong. That's not acceptable. If you think I'll settle for vague promises while he keeps his job, you're mistaken. Daniel's face reddened as he finally spoke up, defensive. I was just doing my job. You were causing a scene, and I had to protect the dealership. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. I wasn't causing a scene, Daniel. I was standing up for my right to be treated like any other customer. You removed me because you thought I didn't belong and made it clear it was because of my race. The lead attorney cleared his throat, trying to regain control. Miss Thompson, we understand your concerns and are open to negotiation, but firing Mr. Reynolds is serious. It's non-negotiable, Vanessa said, steady. If Daniel Reynolds isn't fired, we're going to court. The publicity from that will be far worse than what you're dealing with now. John Mitchell looked ready to protest, but the lead attorney raised a hand, nodding. We'll discuss this internally and get back to you within 48 hours. Vanessa nodded. That's fine, but understand that if Daniel is still employed when we reconvene, we're proceeding to trial. The room was silent as both sides gathered their papers. Daniel's face was flushed with anger, but he remained quiet, likely realizing how precarious his position had become. 2 days later, Vanessa received the call she'd been waiting for. The dealership had agreed to her demands. Melanie relayed the news, her excitement barely concealed. They're firing Daniel and implementing the diversity and anti-discrimination policies you wanted. It's all in writing. Vanessa felt relief and satisfaction wash over her. This wasn't just a financial settlement. It was real, tangible change. They're scared, Melanie continued. They know they can't win in court, so they want this to go away quietly, but we made sure they'll follow through. Vanessa smiled, leaning back in her chair. Good, that's all I wanted. Melanie added, they'll issue a public statement next week, admitting fault and outlining their new policies. It wasn't a perfect victory, but it was as close as they'd get. Vanessa nodded, feeling the weight of the fight lift. It had been a long, exhausting battle, but in the end, they'd won. Daniel was gone, the dealership was forced to confront its practices, and future customers wouldn't face what she had. As she hung up, she allowed herself a moment to breathe. This wasn't just about winning a lawsuit. It was about setting a precedent, one that would make people think twice before treating someone as though they didn't belong. Justice had been served, and this was only the beginning. A week after the dealership's agreement, Vanessa stood in her office, gazing out the window as she reviewed the final details of the settlement. The dealership's public statement had gone live that morning, admitting fault and announcing new anti-discrimination policies. The media buzzed with coverage, a rare admission from a large company driven by fear of public backlash. Vanessa, Melanie called from the doorway, breaking her thoughts. It's done. Vanessa turned, smiling. They issued the statement? Melanie nodded. They did, and they've started the diversity training. They even hired a new HR director to oversee it all. Vanessa exhaled, feeling a sense of closure. It had been a long journey, but she could see the impact. This wasn't just a personal victory, it was a lasting change. And Daniel? Vanessa asked, her voice even. Melanie's grin widened. Fired. His termination was confirmed today. They're keeping it quiet, of course, but it's